Good morning. Welcome back to Crazy Joe's Concession Stand. It's been a while since I put a video out. I apologize. It's the holidays and the work shift I'm working. I'm sorry, but we got to talk about something that has been driving me crazy for a long, long time, and I decided it's time I made a video about it. Let's talk about the Rise of Skywalker. Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. People hate this movie. Some people like it. And here's the thing. Whatever you feel about the movie, whether you hate it, whether you love it, you're not wrong, because film is subjective. Film is going to be interpreted by people in different ways. And what you love, somebody else might hate. What somebody else hates, you may love. And it's all okay because it's subjective. That's the way film is. I certainly have problems with The Rise of Skywalker. I think it is the weakest of the most recent batch of Star Wars movies that we've received. But I do think that it's not without its strengths too. I don't think it's an awful movie. I think it's a weak movie. And I think it is still better than any of the prequels. I will say time and again that the weakest movie in the sequel trilogy, which is Rise of Skywalker, is still stronger than the best movie in the prequel trilogy, which is the Revenge of the Sith. And, that can be debated, and your opinion may differ from mine, but that's all okay because that's what film is. It's subjective. But we need to talk about one line of dialogue, just one line of dialogue. And I don't care if you love the movie or hate the movie. Either is fine. But we got to draw the line here. And this line of dialogue has been ridiculously unfairly maligned. And the line of dialogue is this.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Yes, somehow Palpatine returned. Somehow Palpatine returned. This online, on Twitter, on Facebook, on the social media, has become memed to no end. People hold this up as an example of the worst possible dialogue in movie history, in the new trilogy, and this is the worst line in Star Wars history. It has become meme to death. This is one particular meme that I see all the time. It's clearly a screenshot from someone's social media. I don't know if this was Instagram or what, but this screenshot has popped up all over the internet. And if you read it, it says, if you ever have waning confidence in your screenwriting or storytelling abilities, just remember that a professionally paid multimillionaire screenwriter wrote down the words, "Somehow Palpatine returned," for the final installment of a major Hollywood franchise that has run for over 40 years, overseen by the largest company in entertainment, and they went with it. All right, I'm going to say it. I'm going to drop the truth bomb, as they say. You may have issues with the film The Rise of Skywalker. I have them myself. But there is literally nothing wrong with this line of dialogue. Somehow Palpatine returned. That's not bad dialogue. That's not bad writing. It's logical dialogue that makes complete and total sense. I have pushed back on people who keep throwing that out there as an example of bad dialogue, and I have asked them time and time again, why is this bad? Why is this bad? Nobody has ever been able to give me a good answer. I've had people on Twitter. I had a long conversation with someone on Twitter, and he kept coming back with answer after answer after answer, but he was never addressing the issue, which is, why is this a bad line of dialogue? He was going on about the Death Star exploded, and how could he have survived that? And it's like, okay, so you're talking not about the line of dialogue. You're not addressing the line of dialogue. You're addressing, you don't like the fact that the Emperor returned. Okay, that's a different issue. That is a different issue. If your issue is that the Emperor returned at all, then that's a plot point you have an issue with. It's not this line of dialogue, because we got to take this line of dialogue as it is presented. We're told in the opening credits of the movie that the Emperor has returned. We're told that there was a mysterious broadcast. So somehow the Emperor announced to the universe that he was back. And we get to this scene, and Poe Dameron, who is a low-level fighter pilot in the Resistance. He's not a Jedi. He's not a Sith Lord. He's just a Resistance fighter pilot. He's addressing his troops, and he says, somehow Palpatine returned. Now, the one thing I keep getting from people is they say, well, we should have gotten more explanation than that. We should have gotten more explanation than that. Again, if your issue is that the film does not offer more explanation as to how he returned later in the film or at another part of the film, you're complaining about a completely different issue than this line of dialogue. Because this line of dialogue is spoken by a guy who would have no way of knowing how the Emperor did it. If Poe Dameron in that scene had come out and laid it all out and said, the Emperor has returned. It turns out he was cloning himself, and somehow at the moment of his death, he used the Force to transfer his spirit and mind and soul into one of his clone bodies. That would have been so ridiculously stupid, because how the hell would Poe Dameron, of all people, have this information? How would he know that? Imagine you, whoever you are, viewer, all of you viewers out there, imagine you're watching TV one day and you see on the news that Hitler is back. He's back. How's that possible? Hitler died, right? So he's somehow returned from the dead? Well, there's only going to be a handful of people who know how he pulled that off. A, Hitler himself, and B, whoever helped to resurrect him. They're going to be the people who have the knowledge of how he did it, of how he came back from the dead. Palpatine is going to know how Palpatine returned. Palpatine's minions who helped him do it are going to know how Palpatine returned. But unless if they released a press statement, unless if they came out and said, yes, Palpatine is back, here's how we achieved it, and unless there was like some kind of press statement explaining how Palpatine had pulled out his resurrection, there's no way in hell Poe Dameron, of all people, would have been privy to that information. He wouldn't know. So if you found out, if you're watching TV the other day and you find out somehow Hitler's back, and then your wife comes in the room and says to you, what happened? You go, somehow Hitler returned. Because you're not going to know how he did it. You wouldn't. You wouldn't know how he did it. I wouldn't know how he did it. He would know how he did it. But you wouldn't. So somehow Palpatine returned is not only not a bad line of dialogue, it's a good line of dialogue. It's well-written dialogue. It's logical dialogue, because Poe Dameron would not be privy to this information. Now, if the ghost of Luke appeared, or the ghost of Obi-Wan, or the ghost of Yoda, they are dead and connected to the Force, so maybe they, through their connection to the Force, would know how he did it. Maybe they could explain it, but Poe Dameron certainly couldn't. How would he know that? So every time I see somebody say, oh yeah, Rise of Skywalker, bad storytelling, somehow Palpatine returned, I keep pushing back on him and saying, tell me why that's bad dialogue. Nobody has been able to tell me why that's bad dialogue yet. They bounce around, they say all these things pertaining to a million things except the line of dialogue. Well, the movie should have explained better how he came back. Okay, maybe the movie should have explained better how he came back. Won't disagree with you. Won't disagree with you. But that has nothing to do with that line of dialogue. At that moment, Poe Dameron standing there in front of people he wouldn't know. So maybe later in the movie, maybe 15, 20 minutes later in the movie, another character could have explained how he did it. But Poe never could. It wouldn't have made any sense. So somehow Palpatine Returned is not bad dialogue. Now, you can still hate the movie. That's fine. It's all subjective. You might like the movie. You might hate the movie. It's all good. But there's literally nothing wrong with the line, somehow Palpatine returned. It's a perfectly fine line of dialogue. It's actually good dialogue because it makes sense in the context of the story, in the context of the moment, in the context of who's speaking the dialogue. That line makes total sense, and there's nothing wrong with it. So there you go. And also, it'll never, ever, ever, ever be the worst line of Star Wars dialogue. It's not even in the top 20, top 25 lines of worst Star Wars dialogue, especially in a world where there's a Star Wars movie that has this line.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. Not like here. Here everything is soft and smooth.
There you go. Still the all-time champion of bad Star Wars dialogue. All right, everybody, keep wearing those pajamas.